Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to talk about the winter solstice because we talked about this last year and discussed it as being a possibility of a day when the second coming or something associated with the second coming would happen. And I know that we don't know the day or the hour, but I don't think that means that we can't guess and guess correctly. And I'm not suggesting that it's going to happen this year. I hope it does. But I want to explore this possibility because we're coming up on winter solstice. It's that time of year. And there's three reasons why this could be a day that's chosen for either the second coming itself, one of the appearances, whatever, or some major event associated with the second coming. And the three things that we're going to look at is Christmas. Then we're also going to look at the tilt of the earth. And then finally, we're going to look at the tribe of Dan, because this time of year, when winter solstice usually occurs in the month on the Hebrew calendar that's associated with Dan. And I wanted to review what Dan represents. And so that's what we're going to do. So first of all, let's talk about the winter solstice. Let's define what that is. Okay, we're on Chicago's very own WGN9. It says the solstice is the moment the North Pole is tilted farthest away from the equator. All right, because hopefully you know that the Earth has a tilt, and so when the North is tilted the furthest away from the sun at that point during the year, on that day, that's winter solstice. It's the moment the sun reaches its southernmost position in the sky as viewed from Earth. And over here on Griffith Observatory, they have a depiction of that, and hopefully you've observed that as well. In the summertime, when you're looking at the sky and the horizon, the sun is higher up in the sky, and then when it's winter, it's closer to the horizon. It's further down. Okay. It's the moment the sun's most direct rays fall on the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern hemisphere. The day surrounding the winter solstice is the shortest day. The day surrounding the winter solstice is the shortest of the year in the northern hemisphere. There is no sunlight in the northern Arctic regions of Earth the day of the winter solstice, and contrarily, 24 hours of daylight in the southern Arctic regions, including Antarctica. The sun is actually closest to the earth. Now, this is interesting. If we're thinking about the Son of God, the sun is actually closest to the earth during northern hemispheric winter. That by itself is maybe a little bit of a symbol. The fact that the sun is the closest to the earth during that time of year, talking about the northern hemisphere. 91.442 million miles, December 21st, and Earth's orbit around the sun actually positions our planet closest to the sun, the perihelion, just a few weeks beyond the winter solstice in January. All right, so that's what winter solstice is. Now, let's start talking about Rome and the Roman Empire and Sol Invictus and Christmas. All right. Why might this be important? I'll show you. All right, Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus, or Invincible Son, or Unconquered Sun, was the official sun god of the late Roman Empire, and a later version is of the god Sol. The main festival dedicated to him was the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, birthday of the Invincible Sun, on the 25th of December, the date of the winter solstice in the Roman calendar. Now, in the ancient world, a lot depended on the sun and the stars, and people were very familiar with the sky, and so it was very important. And so what you'll find is that with many ancient cultures and religions, there was great importance put on the sun. And they viewed the sun as going through this life cycle every year where essentially at winter solstice, it was born because it started its new cycle. The days started becoming longer. The sun was higher up in the sky. And so it goes through a period of being born and then growing, and then it's at the height of its power in the summer. And then it starts to wane, and then in winter it dies again. So it goes through a life cycle. You could say that at winter solstice, it's a resurrection of the sun, right? Or you could view it as, you're coming to the end of Earth's history. Symbolically speaking, things are getting darker and darker. And so at the point of winter solstice, that's when things would start to get brighter and brighter and warmer and warmer. So resurrection, more light. You could see how it'd be pretty fitting if that was the case, right? So winter solstice is on the 21st of December, but the Romans celebrated it on the 25th of December. And there was a festival to the sun god Sol Victus, also known as the Invincible Son or Unconquered Son, which is actually pretty fitting when we think about Christ, the true God. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, about how these things from Rome seem to have been taken by the church and repurposed. I don't know how to word that, but I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. And this could be one of those things, the Invincible Son, Unconquered Son. Only time will tell, but let's move on. Festival of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti. In AD 274, the Emperor Aurelian instituted the festival of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, birthday of the Invincible Son, on the 25th of December, the date of the winter solstice in the Roman calendar. Okay, legacy, Christianity. A widely held theory is that the church chose December 25th as Jesus Christ's birthday to appropriate the festival of Sol Invictus's birthday, held on the same date. The early church linked Jesus Christ to the sun and referred to as sun, S-U-N, and referred to him as the Son of Righteousness, prophesied by Malachi. A Christian treaty attributed to John Chrysostom and dating to the early 4th century AD associates Christ's birth with the birthday of Sol Invictus. Quote, "Our Lord too is born in the month of December, the 8th, before the calends of January, or the 25th of December, but they, the pagans, call it the birthday of the unconquered, who indeed is so unconquered. Okay, who indeed is so unconquered as our Lord. Or if they say that it is the birthday of the sun, we may say he is the Son of Justice." End quote. The theory is mentioned in an annotation of uncertain date added to a manuscript by 12th century Syrian bishop Jacob bar Salibi. The scribe wrote, quote, "It was a custom of the pagans to celebrate on the same 25th of December the birthday of the sun, at which they kindled lights in token of festivity. In those solemnities and revelries, the Christians also took part. Accordingly, when the doctors of the church perceived that the Christians had a leaning to this festival, they took counsel and resolved that the true nativity should be solemnized on that day." All right, so you have this weird thing going on between the festival of Sol Victus and it turning into Christmas, and that's how it is today. And now we associate it with Christ, but it's interesting, these titles, the Son of Righteousness, and how it's been changed and how it's been converted into what it is today. Now, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ, we know that his true birthday is on April 6th. And some people dispute this. I don't know why, but it is. David A. Bednar, he recently talked about it in General Conference. I actually did a video about it. I'm not going to do it again, but there's been source after source after source, apostles and prophets that have talked about the fact that it is his birthday. I'm not going to make a whole thing about that. Just search my channel for April 6th and that video should come up and you can watch that. Okay. But still, could it be that Christmas would be turned into a new holiday when the second coming happens. You know, has it been primed essentially for the second coming? And unwittingly, when we celebrate Christmas and we're thinking about his first coming, we're also preparing ourselves for a future holiday for his second coming. It really could be. It really could. I would not be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we do have a holiday that celebrates the second coming whenever it happens. And then later on in this article, it has a section for Judaism, and this brought up something really interesting that I had not noticed before, and I didn't know this at all until now. The traditional image of the sun has also been used in early Jewish prophecy, poetry, and art. Psalm 19 begins, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God, the firmament proclaims his handiwork," and likens the sun, S-U-N, to a bridegroom, to a warrior, and to the Torah. So that's interesting, and I didn't know that before. And could this be something that is connected to the second coming, the sun in the second coming, and in potentially winter solstice? Well, we know that the bridegroom is a symbol of the second coming. It represents Christ himself, right? And then the church is the bride. And so let's just read what it says really quick. Psalm 19, we're just going to read a few verses. The chapter heading says, "David testifies, the heavens declare the glory of God. The law of the Lord is perfect, and the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." And that is something that we're going to see at the second coming, the judgments of the Lord. And they are true and righteous, and no one is going to be treated unfairly. If you're counted among the wicked, it's because you really are counted among the wicked. And that's just how it is. And those that are worthy to live in the millennium will be judged as worthy for that. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament sheweth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is a bridegroom, coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the earth, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof." And I'll tell you what, there is not going to be anything that can escape the heat of the second coming. And it's interesting because if there was one day in the year that you would consider the sun, S-U-N, coming out of the bridegroom chamber, I think it would be winter solstice. That's when the sun starts to come out. It starts to come back, right? It's perfect symbolism. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk a little bit about Rome and how, even though Rome is one of the four beasts in Daniel's vision, it's the fourth beast. And in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Rome is the legs of the statue. And all these different empires are viewed in a negative light because they persecute the saints and they've caused all sorts of havoc, but for the church and for the righteous. But it's all under the authority of God. He allows them to do that, right? Rome arguably is the worst. It's described as the most ferocious of the beasts in Daniel's vision. But even so, I think that a lot of good has come out of Rome in the Roman Empire. For example, if it wasn't for the Roman Empire, I'm not so sure that Christianity would have spread as far as it has. It grew really quick because Christianity was adopted as the official religion of the Roman Empire. So even though it's a worldly power, even though They persecuted the saints and they crucified Christ. I think a lot of good has come out of the Roman Empire, and that it's all part of the Lord's plan. I want to share part of this interesting article called "The New Church Logo: A Designer's Perspective in Analysis." And I've shared this before. He goes through the different aspects of the new church symbol, and toward the end, he says, "My professor Adrian shared the following with our class about the creation of that logo update. He told us that he proposed that the church commission a professional typographer to create a proprietary typeface. Heffler was hired and proposed a design which he called Deseret, based on his own research. With modifications to the font, it was released for public purchase under the name Requiem. Here's a little look into the inspiration for the Deseret typeface used in the new church logo. A lot of inspiration came from the Trajan typeface. Here's a comparison." Okay, so you can see the two right there. And by the way, and I'm not criticizing this person, but the church symbol should not be referred to as a logo or anything like that. It's supposed to be called a symbol. It's the church symbol because it's not a commercial asset or anything like that. Okay, the Trajan font was originally inspired by this column in Rome. Quote, "It is a triumphal column in Rome, Italy, that commemorates Roman Emperor Trajan's victory in the Dacian Wars." End quote from Wikipedia. So here's the column that inspired this new typeface. And then it says, "Isn't that fitting? The font that the official name of Jesus Christ is set in is derived from the Roman Empire that crucified him. And it's no accident that the victory in war column is derived from symbolizes the victory Christ has in the war against evil." So it's interesting. The Roman Empire was used by the Lord to spread Christianity. And it had to be spread. It had to prepare the way for the last days. Could you imagine the church being restored if it wasn't for the spread of Christianity? Like how much harder it would be. Like nothing's too hard for the Lord, but he works through natural means. And so because Christianity was spread and grew because of the Roman Empire, it led to the last days and the church being restored. It's very interesting. And now we have this typeface that was inspired by this right here from this column, right? And then we have the Rome, Italy temple that was recently dedicated within the last few years. And even though there's going to be the two world headquarters, one in Jerusalem and one in New Jerusalem, I can't help but wonder if Rome may play some kind of important role in the future. Because look at all the attention that was given to this temple when it was dedicated. Now, it may just simply be because it's seen as like a victory, because the Catholic Church is headquartered in Rome, in the Vatican, which is within Rome. And that is the church that essentially had everything gone right if Christ would not have been crucified, if the church would have continued and not lost the priesthood and priesthood keys. Essentially, that they took over the spot that should have been the church had it not been persecuted and lost. Does that make sense? They've been the ones kind of in that spot ever since that time. And so you could view this as like a victory in that sense. But it could be, what if the Lord turns this into an important city in the future, in the millennium? Not a world capital, but maybe something else. So again, when we're talking about the festival of Sola Victus, I realize that it's a pagan festival and it's been appropriated by Christianity, but maybe there was purpose to that. Maybe, just like the Catholic Church and the rest of Christianity, maybe it's like paving the way for the the future celebration of the second coming. And maybe just like the Trajan typeface, the festival of Sol Victus, which we now celebrate as Christmas, and Rome as it is right now, and with the new temple, maybe it's all going to be repurposed for the millennium. Okay, now let's talk about the tilt of the earth. It's interesting because Bruce R. McConkie talks about this in the Millennial Messiah. And this is what he says. After our Lord comes and the new heaven and the new earth are a reality, then the earth will bring forth bounteously to support the billions of our Father's children who shall soon find lodgment on its surface. We do not know what changes will cause this to be. Our knowledge is limited to a few slivers of revealed truth here and there throughout the canonized word. Our revealed description of the millennial return of Israel says, "They shall smite the rocks, and the ice shall flow down at their presence, and in the barren deserts there shall come forth pools of living water, and the parched ground shall no longer be a thirsty land." D&C 133, 26-29. If the great ice masses shall flow down before them, it presupposes worldwide climactic changes. And if the deserts are freely watered, conditions will be far from what they now are. It could be, we do not know, we can only speculate. It could be that the axis of the earth will become upright and no longer have the 23.5 degree tilt that causes seasons. It could be, we do not know, that such was the case in the beginning, which might account for the great glacial ages about which scientists speculate. The first mention in the scriptures of seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, as we know them, is found after the flood of Noah, Genesis 8:22. At this point, it is wise to state that there is much more that we do not know than which is known about many things that were anciently and that will be again. So that would be fitting too. Okay, so we've talked about the sun and its birth and death and resurrection cycle, right? But then we also have this aspect of the winter solstice, which has to do with the tilt of the earth. The winter solstice is because the earth is tilted. And you could look at this in this kind of way that, you know, this fallen world is tilted. It's not straight. It's not upright. It's not perfect. It's not how it should be. And so maybe the very earth itself will be corrected. And when Christ comes, he will set it back up the way that it should be. That's an interesting thing to think about. Now, the second coming and the correction of the tilt could happen any day of the year. It's just that it would be more symbolic, I think, if it happened on winter solstice. You know, it'd be like the last time, the last time that we see the death of the sun, for example, right? You see the death of the sun, and then there's the sudden correction of the tilt. And then there's no more of that cycle. Just like how in the millennium, there's not going to be any more death as we know it. You're going to go from being an immortal, quickened state. And then once you reach 100 years, in the twinkling of an eye, you're going to change from mortality to immortality. And you'll be resurrected. So it would be very fitting, I think. I wanted to know, what would the earth be like if there was no tilt? And I couldn't really find much of a consensus. I think there's different ideas out there about what the earth would be like. Maybe some few things that scientists agree on. But let me just show you what I found. This is from livescience.com. Scientists think an earth without a tilt would be stratified into climate bands that would get progressively colder as you moved away from the equator. Right? So, in other words, kind of like the way that Jupiter looks, you know how it has its like stripes, it has its bands. That's because of its weather. And the earth would be not like Jupiter, like a gas giant, but just that you'd have like these zones, you know, as you move north or you move south. And that's kind of how it is now, but it would be even more intense, I think. Humans would never survive the continuous winter of the high latitudes, And so we would likely congregate at the planet's tropical midsection. Fortunately, as things are, Earth's tropical zones tend to have minimal temperature and day length variability over the course of the year. And so these regions can serve as archetypes for what a seasonless Earth might be like. Now, the thing to take into account is that there's going to be more changes than just that. Now, we don't know that the tilt is going to change, but if it does, there's going to be additional changes, such as the continents coming together, and who knows what other changes may occur. So I highly doubt that there's going to be any part of the Earth that's not going to be habitable. I'm pretty sure that we're not going to have this issue with the Arctic regions and them becoming colder and more inhospitable. So we don't know everything. That's just my guess. Let's go over to BBC. There's somebody that did a type of like simulation of what may happen with an Earth that's not tilted. And what they came up with was this. So on the top, this is the tilted Earth, and just like what it looks like, the green are areas where you have forests, and then brown is grassland, and then yellow is desert, and then gray and blue are tundra and ice. Okay. And so you can see the way that it is now, there's a lot of forest and grassland throughout the Earth. But according to this prediction, if the tilt was to go away, then you would have a lot more ice up in the north. And then just below the ice, you'd have a lot more tundra, which would essentially envelop most of Europe, as well as the northern United States. And then there'd be a lot more deserts. You see the yellow right here. So according to this model, it would be a lot less hospitable. But I don't think that this is how things are going to go. And then lastly, there's this article from fizzlink.com. What would happen if Earth lost its tilt and just stood vertical? Answer. That's great. We must be assume. Okay, maybe this isn't the most reliable source. We must be assumed that this change in the Earth's orbital axis is a thought experiment. The Earth can be thought of as a gigantic gyroscope, spinning it at over 1,000 miles per hour at its equator. If its axis were to be suddenly shifted from its normal inclination, inertial forces produced in such a change would literally tear the Earth apart. That said, if the rotational axis of the Earth were perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic, the plane that passes through the Earth's orbit, several dramatic differences would appear. First would be that the length of day and night would be exactly equal over the whole Earth. There would be no seasons, just one average of the current 4. Weather patterns would be very different, much more uniform. These and other changes in the oceans and atmosphere would result in tremendous and unpredictable changes in conditions on the Earth's surface, including shifts in the ocean's levels and changes in the location and extent of arid as well as tropical areas. So I think this is probably maybe a better description of what we can expect, that things are going to be a lot more equal. And that kind of goes along with the idea found in Isaiah in Doctrine and Covenants, where it says, this is Isaiah 40, verse 4, every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. So it's like everything becomes more equalized, right? Because, again, symbolically, that's very fitting, because the world that we live in is very unequal. You have people that are very rich. You have people that are very poor. You have people that have lots of power. You have a lot of people that don't have power. A lot of people have these opportunities, whether it's like family or other things. Other people have, don't have those opportunities. So that's the nature of this fallen world. But in the millennium, things are going to be a lot more equal. We're going to have the law of consecration. You have people, for example, right now that can't have children or weren't able to raise their children. So that right now, they don't have that opportunity, but in the millennium, they will. Does it make sense? So like everything will be, it's like there's going to be this justice. And I don't want to sound like these political people, like justice. I'm starting to hate that word, the way that they use it, you know, social justice, and, you know, just this like emphasis on supposed justice with all these different political agendas. But anyway, there's going to be justice. There's going to be more justice according to the gospel and the Lord and his reign on the earth. You know, so you have it here, Isaiah 40 verse 3. You have it in Doctrine and Covenants 49. Wherefore be not deceived, but continue in steadfastness, looking forth for the heavens to be shaken, and the earth to tremble, and to reel to and fro as a drunken man. And by the way, you have to wonder, could this be referring to the correction of the tilt of the earth? It could. That might be a pretty wild experience for all of us, having the entire planet change like that. And for the valleys to be exalted, and for the mountains to be made low, and for the rough places to become smooth, and all this when the angel shall sound his trumpet. So I don't know. It could be that all these things take place when the tilt of the earth is corrected. Maybe that's what's going to cause the great earthquake, and that's what's going to cause everything to move around. Maybe the continents at that time will move as well. Who knows? But let's move on and let's go ahead and talk about the tribe of Dan. So this is something that Rabbi Gerfine sent me. I will talk to him again, by the way. It's been a while. I'm not going to talk to him as often, but probably just like once a month or something like that. But he sent this to me one time, where in Jewish thought, the 12 tribes of Israel they correspond to a month of the year on the Hebrew calendar. And so it's appropriate, for example, that Judah would correspond to the month of Nisan, which is the month of Passover. And that would also be the time of Christ's birth. So Passover, in everything that it symbolizes as far as Christ and the atonement, but also the time of his birth. So it's perfect that Judah would match up with that. And then you go through the different tribes. In the fall, the first tribe is Ephraim. So basically, you have to kind of like, when looking at this, you have to understand the concept of the way things were when Israel was being led by Moses in the wilderness, and the order of march and the order of encampment. So, for example, when Israel was camped in a single location, the tabernacle would be in the middle, and then you'd have 4 groups of the tribes, each with 3 tribes. So on the east, you would have Judah, and Judah would be the leader of these other 2 tribes, Zebulun and Issachar. On the south, Reuben, and Reuben would be the leader tribe of Simeon and Gad. And then on the west, it's Ephraim, and then on the north, Dan. Dan would be the leader. And when you look at the order of march, it would follow the same pattern. So the lead tribe would be on the left side, you know, as you're marching forward. So Judah right here, and then Reuben, and then Ephraim, and then Dan. So you can think of it as the months of the year, right? So you have spring right here, starting with Judah, and then Issachar, and then Zebulun, and then here comes summer, and then here comes fall, and then here comes winter, right? And you could possibly also look at this as like a timeline from Christ until the millennium. So if Judah would represent the time of Christ, you'd have this period of time, and then you would have summer, which could correspond to the great apostasy. And then, you know, you have this first harvest in the spring, and then you have summer, and then you have the fall harvest, which is brought in by Ephraim, right? And Ephraim is the tribe that's doing most of the work right now to prepare for the second coming. They're the ones that are gathering Israel together primarily. And it's interesting because we've talked about this before. This is in the January 2000 ensign, the gold plates and the Feast of Trumpets. So Joseph Smith received the gold plates on Rosh Hashanah, which is also known as the Feast of Trumpets. And if we go to my spreadsheet over here, you have the main Jewish feasts. There's 7 of them. So in the spring, you have Passover. You also have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as well as first fruits, as well as the Feast of Weeks, which is also known as Pentecost or Shavuot or Feast of the Harvest. Okay. So you have that feast in the spring, which I feel could correspond to Christ in his dispensation. And then you have this kind of period of time right here where there's nothing in the middle during summer, except for early summer where you have Pentecost, but summer is mostly blank. And then, which would correspond to the Great Apostasy. And then in the fall, which would correspond to the last days, you have the fall feasts, starting with Rosh Hashanah, or the Feast of Trumpets. And one of the main features of that holiday is the blowing of trumpets, or the shofar, which is a ram's horn. And it's meant to call your attention to the fact that you're now in the high holy days, the 10 days of awe leading up to Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year. So it's like that's where you first hear like the warning call of the trumpet. And the Book of Mormon coming forth on that day in that year, I think is very symbolic and significant, and it was intended because the Book of Mormon is the main warning call and tool of this last dispensation, this last harvest, the fall harvest, you could say. So with that in mind, okay, so we have Judah that heads up the spring, Reuben that heads up the summer, Ephraim the fall, and it seems like we're in the fall of, dispensations starting with Christ until now. So the next one would be winter after the fall. You finish this harvest during the fall, and then comes winter. And that corresponds with Dan in Asher and Naphtali. But starting with Dan. And you can see here that the Hebrew month that is associated with Dan is the month of Tevet, or Tevez, as it says here. Okay. And if we go on the Hebrew calendar for this year, okay, here we have the 21st. This is winter solstice, and it's the 9th of Tevet. Okay. So if the Book of Mormon came forth on Rosh Hashanah in the month of Tishri, let's go back here. Oops, not that one. So here's Ephraim. Ephraim corresponds with Tishri, and this is when you have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So if the Book of Mormon came forth on Rosh Hashanah, then maybe the second coming would happen during winter solstice, because that's the time of Dan. And Dan has some, there's, I've talked to Rabbi Gerfine about this, but you can also find these things on websites like this, kabod.org, where it talks about the different aspects of the tribes and symbolism and stuff like that. And so I thought it'd be good to read about Dan and how Dan would be fitting for the second coming. Okay. 12 tribes of Israel, Dan, the judge, right? Weren't we just talking about judgment and righteous judgment and perfect judgment? Dan, the judge. And by the way, we right now in the first presidency have President Oaks, who is a judge. He was a Utah Supreme Court justice. He's a judge. There may be a reason behind that. Now, again, I don't know if President Nelson is going to be the prophet of the second coming. I feel like he is, because of the whole age thing and him being among the first ones to experience the twinkling. But it could be President Oaks. I don't know. Either way, President Oaks is there. He's in the first presidency. All right, so let's read what it says here on Kabod. God has judged me and also listened to my voice. Genesis 30 verse 6. Rachel named the first child of her husband. Okay. Rachel named the first child of her nursemaid, Bilhah, Dan, a name that embodies the quality of justice. Judgment and justice are about setting boundaries and maintaining objectivity to avoid confusion. Civilization rests on the justice of its laws and its ability to draw clear lines between right and wrong. The painting of Gush Dan in the Tel Aviv area shows the natural boundary between sea and land, with space for a city to spring up and come into focus. We see the land and water, city and sky, the memory of the past, and the glimmerings of the future. And that's an interesting thing to note. Tel Aviv is in the tribal land of Dan. Okay, I've talked to Rabbi Gerfein about this. I think he said something to the effect that there's like either a train or maybe it's a bus line or something like that that's called the Dan line because it goes from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Tel Aviv is the second largest city in Israel. The largest is Jerusalem, of course, but then after that it's Tel Aviv. And it just happens to be that it's in the tribe of Dan. And if Dan is associated with the second coming and the millennium, then I don't know, maybe it's appropriate that the second largest city would be in Dan. All right, but back to this. We see the land and water, city and sky, the memory of the past, and the glimmerings of a future. Wow. That perfectly describes the moment that we're in right now and the transition between the pre-millennial era and the millennial era. The tribe of Dan, the last tribe to travel in the nation's desert encampment formation, had the task of collecting any items left behind. They are the ones who navigate the boundaries and, while maintaining distinctions, weave together an objective and just point of view. Okay, so the task of collecting any items left behind. That makes me think of this last General Conference and this whole concept of the last wagon and sending out rescue parties. Maybe we're entering that age, the time of Dan. Let's look at that picture again of the order of march. So again, here you have Dan in the back, this back row. And so it makes sense that they would be the ones to collect the things left behind. So I don't know. I feel like it's all perfect. Now, I'm not going to be surprised if the second coming or some major event doesn't happen on the winter solstice. I'm just noticing all these things. It just all works really well together. And maybe, this winter solstice, next winter solstice, some winter solstice will be a significant day. But that's all that I have for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.